Okay, I am so excited today. Finally, doing another episode of Sex and Chronic Illness with Dr. Lee. I've been so busy going back and forth between Virginia and New York, and I've been in the Hamptons a little bit in New York. I'm trying to open another practice, and I've been busy with that. But I'm so excited today because I'm going across the Atlantic to the UK to meet with my guest. I'm so excited. I wish I was really going to the UK to meet you, but maybe one day I'll get over there. I need to definitely do some traveling. I feel like I haven't been able to do anything since.
You'll have to come over.
I will, since COVID is kind of people are just traveling during COVID, So
Yep.
yeah, but yeah, I'm excited. So I am with Becca Wight, and I'm so excited to be with her. I started following you on Instagram. You popped up like on Sex and Disability, hashtag Sex and Disability, and I started following you, and I was looking at your content, and I told my producer Jason, and I was like, I need to get her on my podcast because she's got some really great stuff out there. So what I'm going to have you do is just tell the listeners who you are and what got you into being like a disability activist. And yes, it's
Yes.
Disability Pride Month. We're still in July. So I'm so glad I'm getting
Woo!
this episode out. So yeah, go ahead.
Amazing. Yeah. So obviously my name's Becca. Full name Rebecca, but always gone by Becca. And yeah, I kind of started posting kind of disability related content right as the pandemic hit, actually. So my kind of disability activism started before then. I got diagnosed at quite a young age for the disability that I have. So I have HSD, which is hypermobility spectrum disorder. But I was initially diagnosed with EDS prior to diagnostic criteria changing in the UK. So my diagnosis changed around quite a bit. But I was diagnosed at 12. So I sort of went through that whole experience of being in school with a disability and the difficulties of ableism in high school and growing up kind of different from everyone else, growing up very, ostracized in a lot of ways, kind of differences with bullying and just kind of my experiences in terms of exams and university and everything was very different from my peers. So I've always sort of had an interest in kind of being a person that could give advice to people in a similar situation. I didn't have anyone really at my age. The internet was kind of just popping off in my life around that time. So I wasn't in any of those spheres. I didn't have any disabled friends. So I very much grew up kind of without that representation. So I've always felt it was important for that representation to be there. And sort of that led on to me doing a lot of disability activism in university. And then the pandemic hit. So all of our activism went online, and very much around sort of there was obviously a lot of upheaval to do with kind of the impacts of COVID to the disability community. Obviously, right around when sort of Black Lives Matter kind of very kicked off with kind of the deaths in the US. And similarly, we had riots in the UK. So I started posting about that. And then from there, just led on to start talking more widely about kind of politics, about disability, later about kind of queerness and queer identity stuff as well. And yeah, I like to think that my corner of the internet is a little bit of a safe space for a lot of people, but we still talk about the important things as well. So that's a little bit of background on me, I guess.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, people are lucky to have you because we need more people like you, people that have experienced disability, but also putting yourself out there and doing the activism work and fighting ableism because we know that ableism is everywhere. It's in our relationships. We have
Yeah.
internal ableism that we suffer from ourselves and that we need to address and deal with
Yeah.
and cope with. And then where it happens at university and in job placement and just everywhere. You
Mm-hmm.
really do see it everywhere. And I feel like ableism is one of those things. It just doesn't get talked about enough. It's one of the isms that is there and it's just everywhere, especially when it comes to sex and dating. It's
Yes.
and having and queerness. So what we're talking about here is that marginalization, right? And there's
Yeah.
many layers of it that have to be unpacked. I always think of it like an onion. It's got many layers to it.
Yeah.
And so when I work with patients in therapy that identify as queer and they have a disability, and how do they go about dating? How do they go about living a life in their queerness when there are folks in the queer community that don't have a disability, and how do they find
Yeah.
those connections? So the work that you're doing and that you're putting out there, I think, is amazing because people need to hear that,
Thank
right?
you. Yeah, and I think exactly what you were saying there, kind of there's so many layers to disability and there's so many different names for it as well. Obviously, within the disability bracket, there's sort of mental health, there's chronic illness, there's a variety of different kind of communities that exist within this umbrella term. And one thing that's been really important to me, and now in my life, I have a lot of friends who kind of identify as disabled. One of the real key things is kind of just letting people be themselves. In terms of internalized ableism, it took me so long to overcome that. I obviously grew up kind of with that very much that stigma around me. So it took me a lot of kind of unlearning to get over that and to get through it and to get to a point where I was not only comfortable calling myself disabled or accessing help, but also at a point where I was kind of proudly saying, you know what, no, I am disabled. And that's not something, that's not a bad word. It's not shameful. It's not something that we have to hide. So yeah, it's like you said, so many layers to it. And there's so many different kinds of ableism that need to be fought against. There's sort of institutionalized ableism, there's internalized, and there's also just kind of general day-to-day discrimination that a lot of people face. But yeah, that discrimination in kind of sex and dating is definitely there. And it's there within kind of all communities, within sort of straight communities, within the queer community. There is definitely a level of ableism there that I know that myself and a lot of other people are working to kind of undo and destigmatize kind of disabilities and kind of educate people around.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's what people are trying to do here in the States too, right?
Yeah.
Is to normalize it and that you can still live a shame-free life. One of the things that I always deal with quite a bit in my work is working with shame. I have a lot of patients that will come in and they've had a disability since birth. Because, like what you were saying, there's different types
Mm-hmm.
of disability. I mainly work with folks that have dynamic illnesses, meaning that they go into remission and relapse mode. So I work with a lot of people that have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome,
Yeah.
fibromyalgia, autoimmune disorders. And when they first are searching for a diagnosis, but even when they receive a diagnosis, there's this big layer of shame. And I tend to look at it like an emotion that literally can cover you from head to toe. And it's one of those ones that really has to be cracked. And with shame comes the internalized ableism. And I think a lot of times it's there because people are afraid of just the rejection piece that tends to come from it. Like if I tell people, I have a chronic illness, how are they going to judge me? How are they going to look at me? I am someone that can walk. I don't need a cane. I am not a wheelchair user. However, I still have a disability. And I feel like invisible illnesses are one of those that tend to get misunderstood the most
Yeah.
because again, it's invisible, so people don't see it. But then when you have to explain yourself, you want to make sure that you can do that with people that you trust and that you love.
Yeah, and it's really true kind of what you said about kind of shame very much perpetrating sort of people's experience, especially after diagnosis, because it all links back obviously to the social model of disability and the fact that people very much view disabled, chronically ill, mentally ill people as an issue and as the problem, when in fact kind of the barriers they're facing are the problem. They themselves are not causing anyone issue, burden, anything like that. And if the world was set up in a way and society kind of was educated in a way that kind of accepted these people as who they are, and by that I mean kind of including accessibility in that for a variety of different kind of ways, sort of quiet rooms, ramps, all those different things. If the world accepted them, disability would just be another identity that people have. It wouldn't be so layered with shame. And I think it is that massive kind of society viewing people as a burden that kind of really does just shower people with this shame. And I definitely know that it's something that I've experienced and my other disabled friends have. And it's just heartbreaking in a way, but it's something that I think even people outside of that community can relate to. I know that within kind of the queer community, shame in a very different way is something that so many people can relate to. So I think part of breaking down those stigmas is just recognizing our similarities, even if they're similarities in a bad way and similarities in the way that we face discrimination.
I love that you say that because I think we need to look at similarities, right? Everyone is different. We're all very different, but disability does not discriminate. Chronic illness does not discriminate. You can be whoever and still have it. And I think just coming together and doing more of that work is so important. You also brought up the social model, which is critical.
Yeah.
Because everyone is so fixated in the medical model that disability is the issue. It is the medical problem. It is the disease. And here we know that a lot of people that have a disability can have their own disability pride of who they are and embrace that. But what we find is it's the environments that cause disability. It is the environments that look at shame more than anything, that put people down, that they don't want the education when they could really use it. You know, they could really benefit from having some education on what the social model is and how we really have to look at that. And when we look at the social model, it's broken down into many different levels. I mean, we have to look at intersectionality. We have to look at race. We have to look at socioeconomic status. There's all of these things that we really have to look at, sexual orientation, everything. And when you have all of those layers, I mean, I'm just thinking about that. That is so scary to have to, who's in your corner?
Yeah, and it's terrifying, I think, because I think a lot of people, and in my experience, it's a lot of older generations, but obviously people can be kind of ignorant from many different walks of life. But a lot of the time, people think of people almost unashamedly carrying their identities, queerness, disability, race, whatever it be, almost as like you're just collecting tokens. But in reality, those are what make their walk through life so different. Another person who is exactly like me in all the same communities as me, a white person from the UK who's disabled and queer and a woman, is going to have a completely different kind of experience of society than I will. And that comes down to obviously a majority of different factors, but that's why intersectionality is so important. And that's why I think it's really crucial in all of the work that a lot of people do, in terms of activism, that they're recognizing their privileges, because everyone has a privilege. It's about recognizing it and raising the voices of those whose social situation is entirely different than yours. And that's why I think it's so important to sort of raise sort of Black, person of color voices, as well as kind of raising voices of different people. For example, I'll never be able to speak on sort of trans issues from a place of my own experience, because that isn't my experience, which is why it's important to share from those experiences. Because that's what matters, is educating people. Everyone in the world is different, regardless of whether they don't face discrimination for any matter. Their experience of the world is massively different than everyone else's, and I think it's good to be aware of those differences, because that's how we're best going to accommodate each other and best going to thrive with each other, is recognizing those differences and moving onwards. Yeah.
I love that, because we have to, you know, as a therapist, as an activist, as someone that's working in this field and working with people that have a disability, especially LGBTQIA plus folks that have a disability, we have, and Black, Indigenous, people of color, we have to recognize that. We have to recognize our own privilege. So me as a queer white man, I recognize that privilege, and I'm not going to have the experience of a Black, Indigenous, person of color, queer person, right? And so when I do my work as a therapist, sometimes, to be honest, I may not have Black, Indigenous, people of color in therapy. Why? Because I am white and they prefer a Black, Indigenous person of color, and they should. And you know, and if I do work with someone, I ask them, are you comfortable working with a white queer therapist? And what
Yeah.
comes up for you, right? So recognizing our own privilege and intersectionality, I think is going to be very helpful. You know, when the mess happened over here with the Supreme Court with the
Yeah.
abortion rights and everything and Roe v. Wade, I felt like for me, I was not able to speak a lot about it because I am not a woman and a vulva owner. I said, I will hold space. I'm here, but I can't speak a lot about that. And there are some things that we just can't speak about and things that we can. But I think if we do our own work, what you were just saying, recognizing intersectionality, then we're going to be the most helpful, you know? when
Yeah.
we just are, you know, we have to do that work.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think it's so important as well. And I know this is something that I've definitely had to hold kind of a lot of space for, and very much kind of change the way I approach it, is the fact that we're all always going to be learning. There's always things that I genuinely ask people kind of on my Instagram, educate me. If you see something wrong, if you disagree with something in one of my posts, educate me. And I actually had something happen with it very recently. The disability pride flag has very recently changed because of several reasons. I hadn't been aware of that change. I got educated on my post and I put out a follow up post with that new flag. There's nothing wrong with kind of taking ownership of when you've kind of been ignorant about a topic or an issue or something that other people are facing. It's all about owning up to that kind of lack of knowledge you have and accepting it. As long as kind of you're constantly educating yourself, you're constantly in a place where you're not taking people educating you as criticism, but instead taking it as this is a chance for me to learn about something that I'm not aware of. I think that's really key and really crucial. I know that with a lot of my friends, I always just tell them, if you're unsure of something, if you're unsure of, if this is a question you're allowed to ask, just ask me and I will let you know if that is a ignorant question, if that is an offensive question, or if that's just a question that we don't mind being asked. And in the same way, I have a lot of friends, kind of friends of color, who will do the same for me. I will ask them questions. I'll be like, what's the best way I can help you? What can you educate me on this? Because I don't know enough about it. And it's important to do that thing. And I think it's important to do that within safe spaces. It's not a good thing to just go out to the first kind of, disabled person you see and ask them all these questions about their life story. That's not what we mean. Like, try and educate yourself. But, if you have friends of that kind of community, I think it's always worthwhile having those open communications and seeing if people are happy to have those open communications. Because if they are, then I don't see the harm in kind of having those conversations. I think it keeps things moving. And I think that's the way that people kind of educate themselves in a way that is best. There's a lot of propaganda kind of online. There's a lot of, differences of opinion online. It can be difficult to navigate that. I think it's just important to keep an open mind, and just kind of have those conversations with people near you or even people online. Just constantly educate yourself. It's so key. No
Yeah,
one's an
no, it's
expert.
it's so important. And I mean, we live in a world online. I mean, since the pandemic, I mean, everything has just shifted into this hybrid thing where we're always online,
Yeah.
we're on social media. And I love what you just said, because instead of being called out, it's almost like a called in. Like if
Yeah.
I say something and it is wrong, because I've done that too. We're all human beings. We're
Yeah.
constantly learning. We're constantly learning about everything that's going on in the world right now. And as an activist, I'm sure you see that. As a therapist, I'm always learning. I learn so much from my
Yeah.
clients. I'll have a client come in and educate me on something. I'm like, thank you for that. Or my
Yeah.
colleagues will do that. My Black and my person of color colleagues can do that for me. And I love that. And I think the more education that we do for ourselves, again, we're going to help people. But there is something, I always say accountability is sexy.
Yeah. I really agree with that.
I think it's hot as fuck.
Oh my
I'm all about
gosh.
accountability, man. As a sex and
Yeah.
relationship therapist, I'm like, if you're accountable to your partner or to your friends, man, they're going to love you for the rest of their lives. There's something sexy
Yeah.
about accountability when you're like, you know what? I fucked up and I need help on that, right? I need you to educate me and help me. I
Yeah.
think that's amazing when you can say that and people are like, okay, All right. I appreciate you
Yeah,
being accountable.
because it's sort of in a way when someone's done something that, is offensive or maybe ignorant or something like that, it's the best reaction that you can get out of someone is like, look, I made a fucking error and I'm really sorry for it.
Right, right.
And look, just, I've tried to educate myself on this topic after doing this, but if you could just point me in the right direction, that'd be great. Because what else are people meant to do? Like, I've had so many conversations like that where people have got defensive for no reason, just for someone saying, something's offensive, or, you've hurt my feelings there. Not even if it's kind of relating to discrimination, just general life where it's like, you've hurt my feelings, and there's a note of accountability there. I think it's just so important. And the world would be such a better place if people just took accountability for just making a mistake, because everyone does them all the time.
Yeah, and you're going to do a microaggression. You're going to say something, and
Yeah.
someone's going to look at you like you should not have said that. And then you just say, look, you apologize and you move on. And that's what you do.
Yeah.
And this brings up the thing with like transgender folks. Like, I feel like there are certain things that I can't say. I don't understand. Like, and that's why, to be honest with you, I don't see many transgender clients sometimes because they prefer, and oh my gosh, I wish we had more trans therapists out there.
Oh
I
gosh,
I
yeah.
just, I mean, if I had the money, I would like pay for them to go to school. Seriously. I mean, we
Yeah.
need that so bad, especially like Black, Indigenous, people of color trans therapists. I
Yeah.
mean, I tell you. And I hold a special place in my heart for all LGBTQIA plus folks, but there's sometimes where I don't understand. I am very queer. I love makeup. I can be queer in so many ways, but I am not trans. And so because I'm not trans, in order for me to help a client out the most, I need to refer them to where they're going to get the most help. Now, I've had trans clients in therapy, but I feel like I may not be the best fit all the time. There's certifications now where you can become a transgender care specialist, which is
Oh,
amazing. And so I
amazing.
want them to go to that person. So we have to practice
Yeah.
in the arena where we feel comfortable and do advocacy work in the areas where where we feel comfortable and that we're going to do the most work. But I still think, even though we may not do a lot of work in one area, we still need to do the education piece. And
Oh,
and and that's why
100%.
I'm always learning. I've been in this profession now for 15 years and I'm still learning, but that's what I love about it. That's what I love about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so important. And the thing is, um like I've got many kind of trans friends, and the thing is I'll always prioritize lifting their voice up rather than talking about it myself, because their voice matters so much more on this topic. But anything I can do, signing petitions, sharing things, donating money, anything I can do to kind of support that, I'm going to do. But nothing is going to be more powerful than empowering these voices to stand up for themselves and speak out on these issues themselves. Nothing is going to be more powerful than hearing from real life experiences of these people in so many different communities. And I think one thing that you said there, in terms of we need more kind of transgender therapists, we need more kind of just indigenous therapists, people of color who are therapists, like all these different intersectionalities, like, and the prejudices they face in terms of kind of class, ability to access kind of higher education. It all comes back to that same fight, that as soon as we kind of overcome this sort of battle we have very much about the way that our society, predominantly Western societies, have been sort of founded, the better it's going to be for everyone. And I mean, I know a lot of people who are not going to agree with me there, turfs, like, people who are just intent on kind of hating different people for living their authentic life. But I think it would just breed a much happier world, and like individual countries as well. Obviously, the US and the UK are very similar in their politics. So yeah, I just believe in like raising the voices of those people. And I think it's important to get them into positions of power and support them in their journeys to positions of power.
Right. They're the voices that need to be raised, and they're the
Yeah,
ones that need the support to rise into a power so they can help other people that have experienced what they've gone through. That's exactly what we have to do as privileged white people, right? And to check your white
yeah,
supremacy when you see it. Check it. Check it all the time.
exactly.
Check it at the door. I have to check mine every day. And I'll be honest with you, there's some times where I don't think about it. And then I'm doing this show with you and I'm thinking, shit, I need to check it like every day,
Yeah,
especially now with what's going on, right? I mean, those are the voices that have to be uplifted. And this is the reason why we don't have people like that are successful all the time because of what society does to
yeah,
them and the
yeah,
oppression and disenfranchised. They're so disenfranchised and everything else that ties into that, where if there were more help, we could see a change here. And that's what all of us are really trying to do. It's being an ally. It's like whatever I can do to help, I am here to help. And it
100%.
may not be a lot, but hey, I'm here. I can use my voice to help and to provide. And, because my life as a queer person is different from so many other people who are
Yeah,
queer, right? And being able to check myself. And I think, when we can dismantle white supremacy and misogyny, because we've seen a lot of misogyny coming out here in the
yeah,
United States. I mean, 157 GOP votes against protecting same-sex marriage. And of course, they were all like white Southern men. So
yeah,
yeah, I'm getting a little political right now on my show, but it's my show and I can. But
yeah. I mean,
it's
we're seeing
frustrating.
it's so frustrating. We're seeing very similar stuff kind of over here in the UK. Like, it's so like just frustrating. I don't know how else to describe it, but over here we've got kind of our government currently wanting to dismantle the Human Rights Act in the UK, and we've had today some, changes with abortion laws. It's very similar to Roe v. Wade, that it's just frustrating to see us almost take a step back. And I think that's why voices from so many different communities that are being affected, it's about raising those voices right now. And I think that goes for all year round. I get very kind of personally frustrated that kind of I'll see this influx of, for example, LGBTQ content from a lot of kind of big companies or brands. And I see a lot of people mention sort of Marsha P. Johnson, who obviously started it, the Stonewall riots, among several other kind of transgender activists. And then it disappears. We don't see it for another year.
It
And
goes
it's
away,
just
right? It
frustrating.
goes away. There's a post about
Yeah.
it, and then all of a sudden it's gone, where it should always be talked about. You're absolutely right. I had the opportunity to teach a gender minority course at NYU, and you know it was a great experience for me because I was learning as I was also teaching it. There were things in research that I was digging up that I wasn't aware of. So when I teach a class to students, I'm on the journey with them. I'm taking the class with them. That's what's so great about it.
Yeah.
And I recently taught a class, therapy with LGBTQIA plus clients. And one of the things that I really talked about was the history piece that was so critical. We have to understand history, but also intersectionality. Like things have
Mm-hmm.
changed from when I came out years ago, where it was like, oh, let me help you come out of the closet. It's not so much always about, it is for a lot of people, but it's more about, hey, I'm out and I can be proud of myself. But what is society going to think about me and how are they going to treat me? Am I going to be
Yeah.
shamed and judged? How traumatic is that? So that's why we do have to talk about intersectionality and all those pieces that we're talking about on the podcast right now, because that's the critical piece. And if you are someone who is interested in helping LGBTQ plus AA clients and people, especially folks that have disabilities, read. Go to my Instagram and look at some things. If you go to my website, you can find some resources on there. Those are the types of things that I think we have to talk about more when it comes to working with this. And the other piece is the trauma. There's so much
Yeah.
trauma that we have to work on so people can be successful and they can live the life that hopefully they can live one day. That's what we do in our work in
Yeah.
social work and as a therapist, meet people where they at, lift them up in any type of way we can, and really just hold that safe space for them. You mentioned that earlier, which I loved,
Yeah.
because if you feel safe, then you're going to open up more. You're going to be able to share your feelings. If not, you're going to clam up and you hold those feelings in, and it can cause a lot of anger. And you said something about frustrated and anger. I feel
Yeah.
that way too, because there are things that we're in control of and there are things that we're not in control of. And those things that we're not in control of, that's scary as shit. It just is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's just it's irritating from a real like wider perspective, because one thing that you really said there is kind of queer trauma, which is it's massive. And I think when you take into account intersectionality within that as well, like if you think about the trauma someone's going to face just as a queer person, then you add on top medical trauma as a disabled person, maybe stigma, then you add on maybe racial trauma as a result of kind of discrimination, as well as there's so many other kind of misogyny for one, there's so many other then intersections that that one person can face. And it's not to get kind of really sad here, but kind of it's a huge issue is kind of suicide and people struggling really like unbelievably so with their mental health as a result of kind of all of these discriminations. And there's a reason why we see an influx in queer youth kind of suicide rates, disabled people suicide rates, all these different things. And that's kind of a real key reason, and something which I don't think people talk about a lot, but I think needs to be spoken about a lot, that this is the reason why a lot of people are speaking out. It's because that not only are people dying as a result of these institutional discrimination that they face, like, for example, I know that during the height of the pandemic in the UK, they actually put do not resuscitate markers on a lot of people's kind of medical files without their permission. So a lot of kind of disabled people died just a result of no medical assistance being given to them.
Wow.
Yes,
Mm.
that is a huge issue that we're facing. But at the same time, we've got people who are reaching a point within themselves where they don't feel like they can cope anymore. And I think it's just so important that if we're having these conversations, if there are safe spaces, even if they are on the internet, they're not kind of within kind of person, they're across different seas and different countries and different cultures. It's so important that people have that safe space and people feel represented with that. In a much lighter note, I know that I kind of go on my TikTok and I go on my Instagram and I go kind of anywhere on the internet, and I've created this real nice bubble of kind of disability and positivity and queerness and all these different intersections. Like this is this nice mix of kind of uplifting and kind of political activism and education. But I know that's not what the world is really like. And I know that that's not what a lot of people face. The minute kind of I step out of my door, I know that's not what I face. So I think it's so important that these communities exist. And that's why I think it's so important, this podcast that you're doing, because there's things that just from me being a listener that I've learned from it, and that I feel kind of included in it from previous episodes you've done, where I'm like, oh my God, I really relate to what you or this other kind of guest is saying. Like that really resonates with me. And I know that's going to help so many people. So I just think it's really important that kind of those communities exist, and not only exist, they thrive. And yeah, there's so many kind of issues within them, but I think overall, it's positive. It's really positive thing that we've kind of in at least kind of from a disability perspective, that these communities have very much flourished since the pandemic and since being locked down kind of as a world. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, that's what's been great about social media, is that it's that one place they can go to get support. I love that you do that on your TikTok. You make it
Yeah.
bubbly and fun and hey,
Yeah.
sparkly and whatever you need to do, right? So you can
Yeah.
have positivity. And also the other word that was coming up for me as you were talking was hope. It gives them hope.
Yeah.
It's like she's doing this work. She's putting herself on here for us, right? And thank you for saying that about the podcast. That is the whole
Yeah.
reason for this. It is to have voices like yourself on here so people can talk about sexuality, intersectionality, disability, fighting ableism, all of these certain things that are coming up because it gives people hope. And it's like, wow, I can relate to that person. I also went through that. So whether
Yeah.
it's chronic illness or, it's another type of disability that someone may have. And we also share resources, how I can
Yes.
cope. And, if I can't go to therapy, at least I can find a community online and I can get the
Hmm.
help that I need and be around people that have experienced some of the things that I have, because I think it also starts to normalize it. It's like,
Yeah.
I know one of the things as a sex therapist, when I have people that come in and they're chronically ill and, they're grieving and they're in this new normal and they want to be sexual and they don't know how to be sexual. One of the
Yeah.
first things that I say is, this is really hard. You are grieving a body that is no longer with you. And now
Yeah.
you're in this new normal. And it's like this huge WTF. It's like, what do I do here?
It's so difficult. And it really is a situation where I feel like, and I found this sort of with your page massively, that we don't see the representation of kind of sexy disabled people on screen or in books a lot of the time. So we're creating it. Like, that's what I massively find from like your page and like what you talk about. It's like we're just gonna create it
Right. Yeah.
ourselves.
We're going to
Like,
create it ourselves. They're not doing it in
if
the media. So guess what? We'll do it.
yeah, if Hollywood isn't doing it, if the West End and Broadway aren't doing it, well, not a problem. That's what
Oh
the
my
internet is
goodness.
for.
Yeah, I have a practice in New York City and I actually see a lot of like non-binary and trans artists, like actors and
Yeah.
dancers. And what I love about them is that they're literally creating their own art, because we still see this
Yes.
gender binary shit on Broadway. And it's like we're seeing these folks who are putting together their own art and their shows, and it's amazing. I love it. And I just love that they're getting creative and doing that. You have to be, because of what, talk about the social model, because of what's
Yeah.
happening and what society deems as and what you should be doing and what is right and what you can't do. And
Yeah.
okay, yeah, rules, but telling someone what to do with their body, telling someone that they can't have sex because they have a disability. There's so many options for pleasure. And that's why I
Yeah.
love doing this work. And that's the whole reason why I do the work. It's not
Yeah.
yeah, okay, I love doing it because it's what I chose to do, but it's for people. It's to be a voice for people
Yeah.
and to help people and to normalize, hey, you can have a disability and you can be sexual in your body. And you can be this beautiful trans person. I mean, trans women are women, first of all, and you can have
Oh, yeah.
whatever art you want to have and do what you want. And that's what I love about, that's the difference between having a practice in the Washington, D.C. area where it's very political and having a practice
Yeah.
in New York City and being able to help people who are so stressed about the politics in the district and around the D.C. area. And then to see these amazing artists in New York City.
Yeah.
So we have to have more voices. And I think that's really one of the themes of this episode that's coming out, is it's being a voice for people, recognizing your own
Mhm.
privilege, doing that work, and then being a voice
Yeah.
for people. That's really what this is about.
Yeah. And I, like, in a very similar way to kind of what you were saying in terms of kind of people creating their own art is so I'm not from kind of the city that I currently live in, but the city I currently live in is called Sheffield. It's a very small, well, it's not a small city, but it's not known about. It's not like London or like, Edinburgh. It's not one of those cities that, people assume is the entire UK. But a really great musical came out of Sheffield a few years back called Everybody's Talking About Jamie. And it was about a queer kid in Sheffield, which is it's in the north, so it's very kind of conservative. Well, not conservative in its politics, conservative in its people, in the sense of, very kind of, rough and tough males and that kind of thing. Lovely people though. But it's this story about this guy in Sheffield just accepting who he is and becoming the coolest drag queen ever. And I know
Oh, I
since
love
then,
it.
it's brilliant. It's such a good musical if you haven't listened to it. But it's one of those things where since then, from my perspective, I've noticed that the queer community in Sheffield has just boomed because that representation exists. There's not many, queer kids from Sheffield that are like making big names of themselves, but this person, Jamie, has gone out and done it, and now he's on the West End and he's got an Amazon original film and all about him, and it's great. And that's why I think it's really important that we're talking about the issues both in a political atmosphere, but also in a really fun atmosphere that's kind of just talking about how important representation is and showcasing that. And one of kind of my best sort of, and my favorite forms of kind of representation in the past year was actually in the film Luca for disability representation, just a Disney film. I mean, very queer coded Disney film, but we'll get into that another time.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, but like there's one of the fathers, and we've sort of coined as a community that his disability is very much called passive representation. He has a disability, he has a limb difference, and all that's kind of said about it in the film is, this is the way I was born. And then he just goes on with his life as normal, because disabled people do just exist as normal people in their normal lives.
Absolutely.
They don't always have to be inspirations, and it's not always this sob story, or it's not kind of, their disability isn't a means for an able-bodied character to realize something about themselves or how lucky they are. They just exist. So yeah, raising voices, so crucial and so important in so many different ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love what you're saying about representation, because when you do that, like in an area where you're at, then you see the aftermath of that and what that can cause and how we can see more of it. That's why it's so important to do the work that you're doing over there, and the work that people are doing here, and the people that are doing the work all around the world, because we need it more than anything right now. Well, I think you're a fabulous human being, and I'm going to have to come over to the UK and meet you, and I'm going to have you back on the show again, because I love the work that you're doing and just being you. And I feel your energy, and it's an amazing energy. And I saw that. I see an eye for that, especially when I'm looking at content on social media. And that's when I hunt people down to be on this podcast.
You're just there like hunting Instagram.
I'm watching it. I'm watching it, and my team's watching it. And yeah, this has just been a great episode. I think people are going to love it. I think people are going to really identify with what we're talking about here. I hope so too. Yeah, it's been a great season so far, and it's just been nice to have amazing people on here. And so I'm so happy you were here. And
I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, good. Well, I'm going to have you back, so we'll do it again. But like I always say, get curious about your partner and get creative with your sex.